Hi folks, HR Funk here. In my version of a throwback uniform back to the mid-1980s when I was in the United States Marine Corps. The reason I'm dressed this way today is because I thought it was appropriate to the discussion that we're going to have, which actually goes all the way back to 1935. This is a debate that's taken place in military encampments, it's taken place at gun shows, it's taken place on shooting ranges, and it's taken place in police departments. Specifically, what we're going to talk about is which of John Browning's iconic handgun designs is the best service pistol. The contestants for today's title both sprung from the creative genius of the legendary firearms designer John Moses Browning. First up is the 1911, which, as the name implies, was officially adopted by our military in March of 1911. The 1911 pistol served up through the 1980s, and most people will tell you that they've heard or they've read that the 1911 was officially replaced by the M9 Beretta circa 1985. I went into the Marine Corps in 1985, and I served from 1985 until 1989 as a military policeman, and every day that I worked as a military policeman, I was issued a 1911 pistol, specifically a 1911A1. Furthermore, when I was recalled into the Marine Corps in February of 1991 and reattached to an active MP unit, I was again issued a 1911 for the time that I was back in the Marine Corps. And to add to that, there are units today that are still carrying the 1911 pistol, or a variation of the 1911 pistol, as they're serving our country. So the 1911 has been in continuous use for over a century at this point, and it definitely deserves to be in contention for the best military service pistol ever devised. As well received as the 1911 pistol was by the United States military, it was another of John Browning's designs that arguably became the most popular military sidearm throughout the entire world. That design is what we know today as the P35 Hi Power. Now, it's probably worth saying with regard to the Hi Power that some of, if not most of, the current version of this pistol that we know did not come from John Browning. It was actually created, or it was completed rather, by an FN designer named Dieudonné Saève. And by the way, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, so if anyone knows the right pronunciation, let me know. I don't want to mispronounce his name. Dieudonné Saève is the best that I can do by trying to read it and figure it out. In any regard, Mr. Saève completed the pistol, or completed the design, after John Moses Browning died in 1926. What we can tell by looking at the pistol is there are certain things that are still the same as the prototype that John Browning originally submitted to the French military in the 1920s. The grip profile is still the same and still uses the double stack magazine, although the prototype that Browning submitted did have a greater magazine capacity than what we know today as the Hi Power. And also the barrel's locking and unlocking system is the same as he designed in the original prototype. So whatever in the design currently came by way of Mr. Saève, we can credit at least those two things to John Moses Browning. Again, worldwide, this pistol was far more popular than the 1911, with many, many military organizations. And if you want to find out just exactly how many, do a quick Google search on the Browning Hi Power, and it will list at the bottom of the Wikipedia entry all of the various military units that at one time or another have used the P35 Hi Power. So in order to determine whether the 1911 or the P35 Hi Power was the better military service pistol, what do we need to examine for criteria? The first thing a military service pistol has to be is reliable. If it doesn't work when you need it, nothing else matters. I think with regard to both of these pistols, we can talk about the 1911, which has served in everywhere from the trenches of World War I and the mud and the slop and the blood, through the jungles of Vietnam, all the way into the deserts of our current conflicts, and it has served admirably. I don't think there's many people who will truthfully dispute the reliability of the 1911 platform. Similarly, the P35 Hi Power served on both sides during World War II. There were people that were actually shooting back and forth at each other who were both armed with versions of the P35 Hi Power. Beyond that, the P35 also served in Vietnam. It has also served all the way up through some of our conflicts in the deserts and mountains today. So the P35, like the Hi Power, is an extremely reliable pistol. I think this part of it, or this criteria, is going to be a draw, because I think reliability is going to be something we can't really assign one way or the other to either one of these pistols. They're both extremely reliable. The next quality necessary in a military service pistol is effectiveness. Right after reliability, the next thing you have to have is the ability on the part of the weapon to stop a hostile aggressor who's trying to harm you or harm your buddies. In this case, I think we do have a winner. Now, let me preface this by saying I'm talking specifically about the military's requirement that they carry full metal jacket ammunition. So we are not talking about expanding bullets. When we're talking about expanding bullets, this changes somewhat. But with a full metal jacket bullet, basically it punches a hole through human tissue that's the same diameter as the bullet. It does not expand and displace any other tissue and cause any other wounding damage. In that case, the bigger the projectile is, the bigger diameter is, the more damage it does and the more effective it is. So even though with modern expanding ammunition, the 9mm and the .45 are very, very close in their wounding potential and their effectiveness, when we're restricted to full metal jacket ball ammunition, the .45 ACP does have a slight edge in effectiveness over the P35's 9mm Parabellum. Hand in hand with effectiveness is the amount of ammunition that the firearm can carry. Obviously, the more ammunition in an armed conflict that you have in your firearm before you have to reload, the better off you're going to be. Here again, we have a clear winner when it comes to ammunition capacity. This time, it is the P35 Hi Power. When the P35 first hit the market in 1935, it had a 13-round magazine capacity, which at that time was pretty much unheard of. That was a very high capacity, which is how it got the name Hi Power. It was a reference to the number of cartridges that were carried in the pistol's magazine. The 1911, conversely, when it was first issued to the military and all the way through the time I was using it in the 1980s, had a 7-round magazine. So the P35 has almost twice the ammunition capacity of the 1911. So points for effectiveness go to the 1911, and points for capacity go to the P35 Hi Power. Next, we'll talk about shootability. Shootability is the combination of the firearm's controls, its manual of arms, and its design as it interfaces with the shooter to allow that shooter to put accurate shots on target. Both of these firearms have very strong followings because of their shootability. The 1911, many people believe, is one of the most naturally pointing, naturally shootable handgun designs, particularly semi-automatic handgun designs, that was ever devised. There are an equal number who would say the same thing about the P35. Shootability is actually somewhat subjective, and it has a lot to do, when we're talking about natural pointing, with the size and shape of someone's hands and the way a particular grip interfaces with the shooter to allow a natural point. For me, much as I love the 1911, I think the Hi Power points a little bit more naturally for me. As far as controls go, they are both single-action semi-automatic pistols, so they both have relatively light trigger pulls. However, the 1911 has a superior trigger pull, and I don't think this is subjective. Generally, you'll get somewhere between a 5, 6, 7 pound pull on a GI 1911, whereas the P35 Hi Power is going to be up somewhere probably closer to 9 or 10 pounds. A big reason for that is the magazine safety that is part of the design in the P35 Hi Power. This is something that was specified by the French military when they were looking for a new pistol. They wanted a magazine disconnect, and the one that ultimately found its way into this pistol does have an adverse effect on the trigger pull, whereas the 1911 does not have anything like that. It is just a straight single action trigger system, and it does give you a much better trigger pull than the P35 Hi Power. So points for trigger quality go to the 1911. As far as overall shootability between the two, this comes down to personal preference. I really think because of the pointing qualities of the P35 and the fact that it has a lower recoil impulse than the 1911, it's a little bit more shootable. So I'm going to declare the P35 a winner in the shootability category, but it's a close call. Next quality we're going to look at is safety. As a military leader, one of the last things you want is to have weapon systems issued to your troops that are going to be unsafe and present a risk to other troops or to non-hostile individuals. In this regard, both of the pistols, as I said before, are single action semi-automatics. They both, and I'll come a little closer here, have very similar safeties right at the back of the frame. When we cycle the slide to cock the pistol and engage the safety on the 1911, if we were carrying it in this manner, when we were bringing it up to employ it, we would have to click off that thumb safety before we could start to squeeze the trigger. The P35, by the way, both of these pistols are empty, has a very similar thumb safety. Now this particular model has a slightly extended thumb safety. The original P35 design had a very short thumb safety. And because of that, and because we're talking about these pistols as they were issued to the military, I would give the edge for use of the thumb safety to the 1911 because it was a little bit easier to engage and disengage with the shooting thumb. Although with this particular model, they're both about the same. The 1911 was designed with a grip safety, and as I understand the story, this is something that was insisted upon by the U.S. cavalry at the time for fear that their troopers could potentially drop the pistol and have it discharged because of that dropping. They wanted a grip safety to ensure that the only way that the pistol would fire is if there was a shooter with a good shooting grip holding onto the pistol and pressing the trigger. The P35 does not have any kind of a grip safety. That was something that was dropped by John Browning or Dieudonné Saève, one of them, in this particular pistol. And it was also never specified by the French military, so they didn't design it in there in the first place. The grip safety, much as it is part of the 1911 design, is also something that can be a little bit problematic. And I mentioned this in my last video with the enhanced Remington Commander, that if you don't get a good grip and you're trying to shoot, you could potentially have a situation, and I'll try to do it to where I can demonstrate it. If you're shooting with two hands and here, okay, I got it on the last one, but I did not have that good firm grip to begin with, and it took me 2 or 3 trigger pulls to get the hammer to fall. So it is something you have to be mindful of with regard to your grip with the 1911 that is not a consideration with the P35 Hi Power. As far as safety goes, I would say this makes the 1911 slightly safer, although it does become a concern when you're shooting to make sure you get that good depression on the grip safety. That's not a concern with the P35. The 1911, conversely, does not have any kind of a magazine disconnect safety, whereas the P35 does have that. So when you weigh out all the pluses and minuses, I would say safety between the two pistols is probably, again, a draw. The final criteria that would enter into the decision process for the best military service pistol would be ease of maintenance. Neither one of these pistols is particularly difficult to maintain. They both field strip in a similar manner. The P35 is slightly easier to field strip than the 1911. There is no barrel bushing to concern yourself with in the P35 as opposed to the 1911. So I would again give a slight nod in the maintenance department to the P35, but it's only a very slight nod. As far as actually gunsmithing it and repairing it, I think they're both about the same. So after all that, which one do we have that is the best service pistol? Well, I believe, as we were going through the criteria, the P35 won on shootability, ammunition capacity, and ease of maintenance, whereas the 1911 won on effectiveness of its cartridge. Everything else between the two pistols was basically a draw. So we've got at least 3 advantages on the part of the P35 as opposed to 1 advantage on the part of the 1911. So which one is our winner after all of this? Drum roll, please. The 1911 A1 pistol. What did you expect? I'm a former U.S. Marine. You didn't think I was going to be fair, did you? So in any case, folks, this has been a lot of fun. I'd be glad to know your thoughts on which is the best military service pistol, the 1911 or the P35 Hi Power. If you have any other thoughts, questions, or concerns, be sure to leave those below. And until next time, good shooting.